everybody. It is time once again for the Silver Bullets podcast. I am Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnich.
Chip, the Buckeyes actually got to play football this week, and that's something that, as we recorded this show last week, we weren't necessarily 100% sure that would happen, but it did. Some football was played, and also some actual starters played in this game, I'm told. Even maybe one on the offensive line in the normal spot. But it was an interesting lineup. It was Saturday morning when we got the availability report, or maybe in this case the unavailability report, and found out there were going to be a lot of people missing, including 3 starters on the offensive line, both tackles and the center, and a key backup offensive lineman as well in Paris Johnson. And then you look at defensive captain Tuff Borland and a key contributor in the secondary, Josh Proctor. And I don't know what your thoughts were Saturday morning when that news came out, but I thought this could be a pretty interesting day. Interesting in kind of the way the rest of 2020 has been interesting.
I'm glad that you used that term interesting because, like you said, Michael, we were, just like everyone else, kind of suspecting, all right, who's in, who's out. I think everyone on, I believe it was Friday night, when the images of Justin Fields boarding the plane were shared on social media. So, okay, sigh of relief, Justin Fields is playing. And then you get that, I think, another Twitter image from the Ohio State official media account showing Garrett Wilson's jersey or something like that. So you kind of, okay, well, then, as you said, on Saturday morning when the news came out that 3 starters along the offensive line were not going to be playing, and as you said, Tuff Borland, Josh Proctor, and the move of Harry Miller from guard to center, what kind of a result were we going to have? And it was, in my estimation, very impressive, considering the fact that, let's just say that you had a completely revamped offensive line, 4 out of 5 new starters, and a very impressive performance on the road without their head coach, and a number of key contributors not even making the trip. So it was very impressive.
And as you said, key contributors, that also includes coaching staff members, because there were several coaches that didn't make the trip. There was Matt Barnes, and was Corey Dennis one of them?
Corey Dennis was one of them.
Yeah,
that is correct.
And Greg Madison.
Yes.
So you've got Larry Johnson serving as head coach in Ryan Day's place, and now you don't have a defensive coordinator or co-defensive coordinator. You're without a key secondary and special teams coach. You're without a quarterbacks coach, and with no Ryan Day. And so it's all of that combined. And you and I, we look at our score predictions for this week when we didn't know who was playing, and we just kind of assumed somewhat of a normal lineup. I had 38-16, you had 28-10. So we were not predicting a big lopsided blowout win, even under the the best of circumstances. And these were certainly, we kind of knew some people would be out. We just didn't know who. So we kind of hedged our bets a little bit. But I think what the final score ended up being was even, I think, outside the scope of what I would have predicted had both teams been fully healthy going into the week.
Easily. As a matter of fact, watching the game, my daughter, who is a proud student at The Ohio State University, at one point turned to me and said, "Dad, your score prediction was way off." And I had to kind of laugh. But in fairness, it was the kind of, that score prediction was rooted more on the idea of, all right, well, what if? We didn't know who was in, who was out. And I kind of thought, all right, well, the fact that Justin Fields was going to be playing as a Friday night, that, all right, maybe Ohio State's offense is going to be more along the lines of what we've come to expect. But then as we've been discussing, Saturday morning dawns and you find out that the offensive line has been completely reshuffled and revamped. So I still went into it on Saturday thinking it's probably going to be a very conservative game plan, just try and get in, get out. I think a lot of the college football media world, for lack of a better word, suspected the same thing. I think they kind of were thinking, all right, Ohio State, they're just going to be, I don't want to say lucky, but they're going to be fortunate to make this trip and come away with a win and count their blessings and not really dwell on, no matter how much Dan Orlovsky tried to drill the point about style points. I really think that the Ohio State game plan going into it was just, kind of as Al Davis used to say, just win, baby. And fortunately for Ohio State, they were very impressive. And I know we're going to be talking about that here.
Yeah, a lot of the talking heads that I saw were basically just saying Ohio State just needs to find a way to win and don't worry about, looking good doing it with this many people out, key starters, the coaches out and all that stuff. And, I thought that's probably fair. I think they will be penalized if it's real close. And certainly they'd be penalized if they lost the game. But, it turns out we didn't really need to worry about it. This is a team that came in not having been real impressive on the offensive line this year as it was, because we expected this to be a huge strength of the team, but there were issues running the ball. There were issues in some pass protection, pickups of different blitzes and different stunts, and now you've got both tackles and your center out. You've got a guard moving to center, so you've got four people that are out of their normal position. Three of them being new to the line, and then Wyatt Davis being the only person who was in the spot that he normally has been all year. And yet, you go out and it's 52-12, a 40-point victory, easily covering the spread. And this team did whatever it wanted. If it wanted to pass, it passed. If it wanted to run, it ran the ball. I mean, several explosion plays in the running game. And granted, Michigan State's not the best team in the Big Ten, certainly not even a shadow of the Spartans' normal selves, but this is a Spartans team that had beaten a top 20 Northwestern team and had shown some glimpses of competence, and it was just a complete dominating victory. Ohio State by 40, as I mentioned. I think you had picked Michigan State to score 10. I had picked them to score 16. They ended up with 12, so we kind of split the difference a little bit there. And I went 38 for Ohio State, and you went 28. So I'm going to claim victory because I was a little closer.
I have no problem with that. And speaking to the impressiveness of the victory, I think the mere fact that, and I have to, my respect for Ohio State for the way that they handled this whole situation, because let's face it, it's been a challenging year for everybody, but these players, especially, with the sacrifices that they have made, the way that the season has unfolded, everything that they've gone through, and then to find out probably, I guess you could say a little over a week ago, about certain players testing positive, which means that they're going to be withheld from game action unless the Big Ten changes or revises its rule, for the next couple weeks. That it speaks to the not only the quality of the recruiting that Ohio State has done throughout the program, but also with the player development, because the fact that you're talking about with DeJuan Jones, Matthew Jones, and Max Ray making their first starts. And granted, I know that DeJuan Jones, Matthew Jones have had some playing time. I may be mistaken, and this is not meant in a disrespectful way to Max Ray. I believe I read somewhere that maybe he has had maybe one snap, maybe two snaps prior to the game on Saturday at Michigan State. So the fact that they were able to come in, not that they were perfect, but they were able to come in and contribute to such a dominating performance offensively. Like you said, if Ohio State wanted to pass or run, they were able to do so very effectively. And it all starts with the offensive line.
Yeah, it was a good day for the line. It was a good day for all aspects of the offense. Kevin Wilson called a pretty good game overall. There were a couple of times when I went, I'm not sure I would have done that, especially in terms of the early snapping problems that we saw on the from the center, and this is a center who usually is playing guard. So Harry Miller was having trouble kind of dialing in, and it was almost a situation where just about the time you said, well, maybe Justin Fields should just line up a half a yard to his right, then you get one to the left and low, or maybe a little high, and there were just some problems with the exchange early, and then you get down to the goal line and you're thinking, okay, well, now they'll just go under center and sneak it, and they don't, and it took them a couple plays to get in from there, and it was just a curious decision, I think, from the coaching staff, but maybe they were worried that putting Fields under center suddenly when he'd been taking shotgun snaps, maybe that wasn't the right time to do it. I'm not sure, but I think I would have went under center a lot earlier than Kevin Wilson, and that's just me. I'm a little more conservative, and I think I would have said, he's having trouble with these. Maybe just put Justin under center.
Well, I completely agree that I certainly believed when you talk about in the first quarter that Harry Miller was having issues with the snaps, and I think somebody tried to make light of it. That they were saying something about lip reading Harry Miller on the sidelines. You could tell that he was as exasperated as anyone, and I tried to remind other people that Harry Miller, like you said, he's used to, at least this season, playing guard. When he was in high school, he was a center, so it's not as though he never played the position. Mm-hmm. But in fairness to Harry Miller, it's not as though like he has a wealth of experience playing anyway. I mean, considering the fact that he played sparingly as a true freshman last year, and they've had an abbreviated season this year, it's not as though he had a wealth of playing experience, let alone going back to a position. Now, I genuinely don't know at the high school level as a center if he would go directly to the quarterback or if he did a lot of shotgun snaps. But I think that that's something that they will get fixed for this coming game against that team up north. And I'm happy to see that they were able to kind of get it working against Michigan State this past Saturday.
Yeah, once the first drive or two after that, it was just very sporadic. There'd be one every once in a while. Clearly one to Jack Miller at the end of the game was a little unfortunate because it ended up in a safety. But overall, those things worked against Ohio State a little bit in the beginning in terms of disrupting the timing of running plays and some of those short passing plays. And, Justin Fields, we had talked about how he would bounce back from a game against Indiana in which he didn't necessarily make the best decisions of his college career. And he bounced back very nicely because anytime he was in doubt, he just tucked the ball and ran. And it turned out to be a big part of Ohio State's offense on the day. Anytime he wasn't sure what was going on or if things were a little disrupted, he just said, you know what, I'm just going to take it and keep it, or I'm going to throw it away. And, he was very smart with the football, and that's what you want out of your leader.
Precisely.
So, Chip, the Buckeyes deferred. They won the toss, which is good. Good for Larry Johnson. He's 1-0 in coin tosses, and he defers, and the defense comes out and gets a stop. Ohio State goes down and scores, makes it 7-0 on a Justin Fields 2-yard run. It really wasn't too much of a problem. The only time Ohio State was stopped basically was when the offense stopped itself with penalties and that kind of thing. Garrett Wilson scored on a 28-yard pass to make it 14-0 at the end of one. Justin Fields with a 1-yard run early in the second quarter to make it 21-0. And this thing ran all the way up to 35-0 before Michigan State got an answer. It was 28-0 at the half. Final score coming from the first half coming on a Haskell Garrett 0-yard interception return. He tips the ball and catches it in the end zone, and it was a great thing to see on replay because we sure didn't get to see it live. Thanks, ABC.
Yeah, ABC's camera work was not distinguished on Saturday. It kind of went hand in hand with some of the commentary, but Haskell Garrett, when this year is over, and no matter how it turns out, Haskell Garrett is going to definitely be one of the more pleasant memories that I will have of this season, simply because of the way that it started out for him with, the getting involved in that altercation that, could have been fatal. And the fact that he was able to come back and be not just a contributor, but we're talking, when he's in there, he disrupts. And I believe I may have seen something before we started recording that I believe he's been invited to the Senior Bowl, which is arguably the most prestigious of the postseason college football scouting events. So the fact that NFL personnel people are recognizing, hey, this guy can play. So, Haskell Garrett, I'm sure Coach Johnson, being his position coach, was extremely proud of the fact that Haskell Garrett not only swatted the ball up in the air, but also came down with the interception. It's unfortunate we didn't get to see it live, as you said.
It's unfortunate that he's a senior, because this is a kid who I'd love to see come back and take advantage of that extra year of eligibility, since they're not going to count this year against these kids, because he could really improve his draft stock. He certainly has improved it already. If he's not in the conversation for all Big Ten defensive line, then he should be. He's just had a great year, and it's been a great story. As you mentioned, he tried to break up a fight, ends up getting shot in the face, and it was very, very scary for him for a while, and I'm sure he still probably is dealing with the after effects of that, but it certainly hasn't affected his play. He's been fantastic, and that was a big-time play by a big-time player. And, give an assist to Drew Chrisman, the Big Ten Special Teams Player of the Week, because he pinned Sparty down deep in its own end a couple of times.
Maybe there's something about East Lansing, because it certainly seems to bring out the best in Drew Chrisman for Ohio State. I'm sure Michigan State is certainly not going to miss seeing Drew Chrisman, because this is the second time that Drew Chrisman, in his appearances, at Michigan State Stadium, that he has had games like this, and it makes you just wonder, all right, maybe the Detroit Lions, speaking about the NFL draft, they should kind of look into Drew Chrisman, because he certainly seems to play his best when he's up in that state.
Yeah, it brings out the best in him. He had a 74-yard punt in this game. So it's 28-0 at the half, as I mentioned. Trey Sermon tacks on a 64-yard touchdown run to make it 35-0, and just an incredibly heads-up play and hustle play from quarterback Justin Fields, a guy who, if Ohio State had played the proper number of games, he would be getting a lot of Heisman play. But he sprinted down the field, and not that the block was necessary per se, but he gets a block at the end and makes sure that last guy has no shot at catching up to Trey Sermon. A really tremendous play.
Very impressive for a quarterback. I think, as you said, I don't know how necessary it was, but it certainly endeared him to his teammates for the fact that he was willing to, like you said, sprint down the field to not be, I don't want to say afraid, but not to hesitate to be physical, to contribute to the block. So I'm sure that's going to be something that the coaches will speak positively about when they have their film session with the team.
Absolutely. It was that's the kind of play that that's why your teammates love you. Those are the kind of plays that show up on film, and everybody just not that they already weren't making plays for Justin Fields, but they're going to be even twice as more willing to make plays for him moving forward. Sparty gets on the board with 5:30 to play in the third quarter. A Peyton Thorne 20-yard run. Once again, a backup quarterback gets in the game against Ohio State and suddenly turns into Joe Montana. I think he hit 10 of his first 11 passes in this game. He caught Marcus Williamson on a double move, which seems to be not that hard to do this year. He's like, I compared him in my column this week to, maybe it was a dog in a previous life, and he never figured out that the owner is not throwing the tennis ball; it's behind his back.
Yeah, Marcus Williamson, unfortunately, he was one of these guys coming into 2020 that I freely admit I had high hopes for, and it's been a rough year. I know that, as we said at the onset of tonight's podcast, that Ohio State secondary was already shorthanded, with everything that happened with COVID. And unfortunately for Marcus Williamson, like you said, he seems very easily susceptible to double moves, and I'm sure that future opponents are going to try to bait him in much the same way that Michigan State did this past Saturday.
Yeah, now we did see a lot of big plays against this secondary in the Indiana game. Clearly, Michigan State not as talented at the wide receiver position or the quarterback position. However, it was nice to see that the secondary was pretty buttoned down most of the day. I mean, they didn't really allow a whole lot. I mean, Rocky Lombardi could do nothing. And it was Peyton Thorne did have a couple of good drives, and then they sort of figured that out and kind of shut him down the rest of the way. The Buckeyes then added a field goal to make it 38-7 after 3 quarters. So, the game was pretty well in hand with a quarter to go. And if it wasn't already, a couple of more big explosion plays from the offense. Justin Fields, a 41-yard pass to Chris Olave to make it 45-10. And then C.J. Stroud, in his first action of this game, he just goes 48 yards on a running play and makes it 52-10. And then, of course, the bad snap over the head of Miller into the end zone for the safety, making it 52-12. A comprehensive victory for the Buckeyes. A lot of big plays. Last week, when the Illinois game was supposed to take place, I had Trey Sermon as my pick to click, and I decided to change it out for Michigan State, and I shouldn't have done that because big day, best day as a Buckeye for Trey Sermon, who carried 10 times for 112 yards and a touchdown, including that 64-yarder.
I'm very happy for Trey Sermon because I know a lot of the second guessing by Ohio State fans about, why, what's the deal with this guy? Like a lot of people kind of questioning his ability. He really had, since he's been here on the Ohio State team, this was without a doubt his best performance. And somebody else that came in at the tail end of the game. Now, granted, it was, Ohio State they had thankfully pulled Justin Fields and Trey Sermon and some other players from the starting lineup because the game was well in hand. Just personally, besides C.J. Stroud having that impressive 48-yard touchdown run, I was impressed by Mayan Williams. He was I think it would be fair to say that, he was a guy who last year was a later addition to the recruiting class because some of the players that Ohio State had been recruiting at the running back position decided to go elsewhere, and Ohio State went after Mayan Williams. I think was originally verbally committed to Iowa State, flipped his commitment late and signed with Ohio State. Now, granted, it was against, it was near the end of the game and he didn't, score a touchdown. But when Mayan Williams runs, he runs hard. So I think he has a very bright future if he continues to play at the level he showed against Michigan State.
It was a very Marcus Crowley effort from Mayan Williams, I think.
I would say that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was what was interesting was, and again, I don't want to try and stoke the fires of discontent and try to suggest that maybe there's been a reshuffling of the running back depth, but the mere fact that Mayan Williams was in before Steel Chambers at the end of the game, and Steel Chambers, we mentioned earlier in the season, had some challenges with holding onto the ball. That maybe this is being done to motivate Steel Chambers. I don't know. I'm not trying to suggest that, but my point being that Mayan Williams, when he he certainly looked determined to make the most of his opportunities when he was in the game. So I found him impressive. I agree with you about C.J. Stroud. That was a very impressive touchdown run. I felt sorry for Jack Miller. That had nothing to do with anything on him as much as it was just that errant shotgun snap that contributed to the final points on the board for Michigan State. He just happened to be the quarterback in there when it happened, but very impressive win considering all of the adverse circumstances that Ohio State's coaching staff and players experienced going into that game.
Yeah, I think Mayan Williams appears to have earned that playing time. I mean, if the in-game performance is any indication, because he as you mentioned, he looked like he ran hard. He was difficult to tackle. I really like what I saw, and I think that's been pretty much universal across Ohio State fans. Master Teague didn't have a great day. 14 carries, 46 yards, only a 3.3 yard average, and he was kind of the victim of some of those early snap problems where it ruined the timing of some of those runs. So, and that kind of contributed to it. But Ryan Day said last week that he's kind of, the staff's kind of gone in and figured out what Master Teague does well, what Trey Sermon does well. And it really showed in Trey Sermon's performance in this. He had an 11.2 yard average per carry, only 10 carries, very economical, 112 yards. Justin Fields carried 13 times for 104 yards, his best day running as a college quarterback, second ever 100-yard game for Justin, and he averaged 8 yards. He ripped off a 44-yarder. Of course, he had C.J. Stroud's 48-yarder. Teague had a 21-yarder as well, so some explosion plays in the run game. It was good to see. Michigan State, on the other hand, really didn't get a whole lot done. Peyton Thorne had some big runs. He had a 31-yarder where, it looked like nobody really wanted to tackle him all that much. They just wanted to run into him. And he ends up with 42 of Michigan State's 81 yards rushing. Elijah Connor had 8 carries for 37 yards. And Connor Hayward did really nothing, 8 carries for 11 yards. And Rocky Lombardi did not do anything in the run game, and they like to use him to help out in the run game with some quarterback draws and some keeps. But he was not able to do much before he left the game after sustaining a head injury when he was sacked and hit his head on the turf. Justin Fields, Chip, 17 of 24, no interceptions, 199 yards, 2 touchdowns. He was sacked 3 times. It's not totally surprising given the inexperience on the offensive line in this game. And there were a couple times where Fields was maybe waiting, some max protect sets, waiting on something to develop downfield that didn't get developed, and he ended up having to eat the ball a couple times. Peyton Thorne came in, and again, like I said, he was 10 of his first 11. Ends up 16 of 25 with an interception. Fantastic diving pick by Sean Wade. 147 yards, no touchdowns. He was sacked twice. Rocky Lombardi, 5 of 11, and an interception, that pick 6 in the end zone. 33 yards passing for Lombardi, and he took 1 sack. So Justin Fields, real good day. Not so much for the Spartan quarterbacks. Then in the passing game, Chris Olave caught 10 balls, 139 yards, and a touchdown, including that 41-yarder. But Chip, he had a drop in this game, and he fumbled twice. So that's tough. It's not something that he's going to want. It's not something the coaches are going to want. For all the good things he did, I think that's a big kind of, that's a zit on the prom picture for Chris Olave.
That's a unique analogy. I give you credit for that one. And Justin Fields, it certainly, he demonstrated that he was just the best player, regardless of position, on the field. I mean, the fact that we kind of alluded to some of the issues with some of the errant snaps that he would, I believe that Gerd and Tom Orr on their podcast, that in some ways Justin Fields was kind of doing his best Ozzie Smith imitation as a shortstop, kind of fielding the ball. I think you accurately stated, that some of those runs were as a result of just broken plays that he just realized I don't have time to try to see if anyone's open. I'm just going to pick up and run. And as I said a moment ago, athletically, I think a lot of those yards were just as a result of broken plays that Justin Fields, he's that superior as an athlete, being able to turn nothing into something. And I guess the mystery I will have for when you alluded to this earlier in the podcast is, what is it about the backup quarterbacks at some of these schools that Ohio State has played or will be playing? Because we kind of wonder, like I look at Peyton Thorne and I genuinely hope that Rocky Lombardi's okay. I haven't seen anything about how he is doing. I can only guess that maybe he sustained a concussion or something along those lines, because he looked kind of dazed. But Peyton Thorne, granted, wasn't completely dominant, but he certainly looked a heck of a lot more impressive in his time than Rocky Lombardi. So it was a good win considering all the circumstances. And I'm just glad that Ohio State, they're able to get back into the Big Ten discussion as well as the college football playoff discussion as a result of this win.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to accuse anybody of anything, Chip, but I do know that those guys from Buckeye Weekly, they follow me on Twitter. And I will say on the first drive that Ohio State had that I made mention that we really didn't know that Justin Fields was going to have to play quarterback and shortstop. So, I'm not saying they stole from me. I'm not saying it's a terribly original thought that I had, but I'm just going to say I was in on that shortstop joke early.
Okay. Give credit where credit is due.
So, Chip, you had Master Teague as your pick to click on offense. I would say that he did not click on this particular Saturday. But my pick to click did even worse, because I thought that this was going to be a return to throwing to some of the tight ends, and so I picked Jeremy Ruckert, and again, he got shut out. So that's 2 games in a row that he's been shut out, and I guess year of the tight end is officially over at Ohio State.
Did it ever actually start? Because I think we've been waiting on that at least. That's always the running joke for Ohio State fans, is that this is the year Ohio State's going to finally throw to the tight end. And I certainly believed at the beginning of this year that, with considering the offensive line and Justin Fields, his ability to find secondary receivers, I really thought Jeremy Ruckert and the other tight ends on the roster would be beneficiaries of that, but it certainly has not come to pass like that.
Yeah, I think they just, they used him early in the season, near the goal line, and he had a few touchdowns early, but I think this was a situation where they used a lot of 2 tight end sets and kept guys in to block and help out the sort of novice offensive line that Ohio State had to run out there on Saturday. So it's not too surprising. If I had been thinking ahead of time, I would have changed that. Defensively, though, you had Pete Werner, and I was really mad that I let you go first on defense too last week, because he would have been a great choice, and he ended up with 8 total tackles to lead the team. He was really, really strong in this game overall. I had picked Tuff Borland, and he, of course, missed the game. So I changed before the game just to get on record, and I went with Baron Browning. And he had 4 tackles and a pass breakup and a forced fumble, but I would say he did not click in this game, Chip. I mean, this was, and I made mention in my column that we saw his worst drive as a collegiate linebacker in this game. He had he got really just faked silly by Peyton Thorne and missed a sack. And then later on that long run, as I alluded to, he just ran into Peyton Thorne, and Peyton Thorne bounced off of him and had a big run. So it was not Baron Browning covering himself in glory on this day. He made a few plays, but I would not say he clicked.
Well, my sincere apologies about stealing the player that you wanted with Pete Werner. As far as I getting back to defensively, it's been a challenge, and I'm not sure if it's a matter of the scheme. When we talked about the secondary, earlier, we mentioned about like Marcus Williamson having his challenges. As far as, getting back to Baron Browning, he's one of these guys that I think is just going to always be, I hesitate and I stammer to say this because it sounds terrible, is that I think he might be just kind of remembered as kind of unrealized potential. And I think he's going to play in the NFL. I just don't know in what capacity. I can't imagine, that an NFL team is going to bypass him for all 7 rounds. You know what I mean? Because the athletic ability is there, but it just seems as though Ohio State fans have maybe been expecting so much because he was so ballyhooed as a 5-star recruit coming in, and in my humble opinion was played out of position for the first part of his career. But I think everyone kind of thought he would flourish this last year, and it just really hasn't come to pass yet.
Yeah, indeed. And again, he shows these flashes. It just doesn't always come out. And he kind of reminds me of a little bit of Jerome Baker. Right? I mean, he's kind of a guy who made some plays, and he would make an outstanding play every now and then, but then he'd kind of disappear for large sections of the game. So he kind of reminds me of that. And obviously Jerome Baker is doing okay for himself in the NFL. So I think you're right. I think he will get drafted and play on Sundays. This was a game where we saw a lot of backups, and even earlier in the game than kind of I expected to. But like we saw a sack from Cormonte Hamilton in this game. We saw Cody Simon in the field making plays, in I think the third quarter. So, this was a good opportunity to see a lot of players play. And remember seeing Jerron Cage get in on a sack. This was it was a good team day.
And a player who I think a lot of Ohio State fans, at least I know, I've been kind of hoping for a big year. I think Tyrik Smith certainly had his best game of the season. He at defensive end, I know that there's been a lot of concern about the pass rush. Tyrik Smith, just to put it in proper perspective against Michigan State, but it's good to see that Tyrik Smith had a really good game as well.
Yeah, I believe Dan Orlovsky wanted him thrown out of the game at one point.
Yeah, as I said, ABC did not really cloak themselves in glory with their color commentary and or their camera work.
Not really that egregious, but he was making a lot of that's the same hit on Lombardi that that they had on the other side, and I don't agree with him. I think that Tyrik Smith, his sack of Lombardi, I don't feel like he came down all the way on top of Lombardi. I think he kind of got a little bit off to the side as much as he could. And Lombardi's a live ball carrier at that point. The difference in the other play, and I know the way that they announced it was he came down with his full force on the quarterback. But the other part of that was Justin Fields threw the ball, took a step, and the guy still hit him and landed on him. So there's quite a bit of difference in my mind in one getting called unnecessary roughness or roughing the quarterback and the other one not getting called that.
I completely agree.
All right, so we move on. This is a big triumph. Not impressive in terms of the opponent, but in terms of the overall performance, the fact that these guys were missing so many people, not only on the field, but in their headsets as well. I think you have to look at this as just an unqualified success. It's too soon to know if they cleaned up some of those problems they had against Indiana because the offense for Michigan State isn't as good. But we've seen this defense all year, and some of these games have been against teams with not great offenses. And in this game, you look at the drive charts, and Ohio State, I think through 4 Michigan State drives, I think had only given up 1 first down, and that was via penalty. I think Justin Hilliard had been flagged for pass interference. It was only like an 8-yard penalty, but it was an automatic first down. So I think the defense, you'd have to say, did a fantastic job. Again, keeping in mind the opponent, but there have been other bad opponents that have done better.
And I think it just speaks volumes about the development. I believe Coach Day even said that it just kind of, it speaks to the program that they have built, that has been built and that has been sustained from the coaching transition from Coach Meyer to Coach Day. The fact that Coach Day wasn't there, as we also mentioned, Corey Dennis, Matt Barnes, Greg Madison, other coaches not being there, the players that weren't there, that it just speaks to when they talk about the quality and depth of the program is very, very strong. So it certainly was very impressive to see.
Indeed. Well, that'll do it for our analysis of this game, unless there's anything else that you wanted to discuss from Saturday's game.
No, I'm good.
All right. Well, you and I will talk a little bit about the Big Ten's other games, and we'll, of course, get ready for the game. We're going to assume at this point that it's going to happen, and if it doesn't, well, I mean, that's 2020 for you. But we'll get to that right after this. All right, Chip, let us quickly, we've already talked about Drew Chrisman getting the Special Teams Player of the Week in the Big Ten this week. Very, very deserved. I mean, he was crushing the ball 50-plus yards. He was downing them inside the 20. In fact, downing them inside the 5 all day. So it was a good day for Drew Chrisman. Justin Fields is the Offensive Player of the Week in the Big Ten. Talked about his stats as well. I think both of these are pretty deserved.
Certainly. I think, as you said, very well deserved, especially considering the circumstances for Justin Fields. Drew Chrisman, his performance certainly warranted it, but that I think Justin Fields with a revamped offensive line, the performance he gave on Saturday certainly justified as well.
Indeed. Now, one thing we didn't mention, which is kind of a scary moment, is the fact that Wyatt Davis left this game with an injury. We're not really sure what that's going to be like going forward. You look at this line and you go, the one guy who was playing his normal position, and he's the guy that gets hurt. Also, the best offensive lineman on the team, probably. That was a little bit unfortunate. So that's a thing that we missed in our recap. But I did want to mention that. The line, though, played very well, Chip. In fact, some champions grading out on that line. Left tackle DeJuan Jones, left guard Matthew Jones, and right tackle Max Ray, all earning champion honors. And, that's not too bad. Wyatt Davis also named a champion. The only offensive lineman who didn't rate as a champion was Harry Miller, and I got to think it's just because of the snaps.
Yeah. I feel for him. If anything, this is kind of very reassuring to me as an Ohio State fan, taking the Michigan State game out of the equation. The fact that, when you see, a player like DeJuan Jones, when you see Max Ray, when that, Thayer Munford is going to be off the roster next year, that you have guys getting some valuable playing time that will be able to step in at that valuable tackle position, I think they certainly justified being named champions.
And I would still like to see DeJuan Jones line up at fullback on the goal line.
Then that means we have to go under center to be able to get him. So
that's true. I think if you put Master Teague behind DeJuan Jones and just let him run behind DeJuan Jones, I don't think. I mean, you could probably get 5 yards a carry doing that. Just right up the middle.
I mean, he's certainly. I mean, at 6'8", I think they said on the broadcast he was north of 360 pounds, and that's after he's lost weight. I think the conditioning that Coach Marotti he's just naturally big, and from everything I understand, he's a tremendous basketball player. I mean, his lateral movement. When he plays basketball, I guess it's something to behold. So yeah, you might be onto something there.
Also grading out as champions on the offensive side, Justin Fields, the offensive player of the game. Trey Sermon We mentioned his big day. And tight ends Luke Farrell and Jeremy Ruckert, who combined for 0 catches, so they must have done a good job blocking.
Certainly. As you said, maybe it doesn't show up on the stat sheet, but it certainly shows up where it counted, which is the fact that they contributed to the team victory.
Right. On the defensive side of the ball, Ohio State graded out co-defensive players of the game, Sean Wade and Haskell Garrett. They just happened to be the two guys who intercepted passes. They were joined by Tommy Togiai, Jonathan Cooper, Zach Harrison, Javante Jean-Baptiste, and Tyrik Smith, guy that you had brought up earlier, rightly so. Linebackers, Baron Browning, Justin Hilliard, and Pete Werner. So apparently my assessment of Baron Browning is not the same as the coach's, but I saw some missed plays out there that just kind of made me shake my head. Cornerback, Sevin Banks, and safety, Marcus Hooker. And I believe Drew Chrisman was the special teams player of the game for Ohio State as well. So, not too bad. I think the champions were kind of on line of what we thought they would be. I think Browning surprises me mildly, but like I said, he did make some plays in this game and put up some statistics. He just he left some plays on the field. So again, it's kind of reminiscent for me of Jerome Baker's time at Ohio State.
I think it's a good comparison, and maybe the plays that you and I saw where Baron Browning, like you said, left plays on the field. There were other plays that, depending on the assignment, maybe that weighed more positively in the eyes of the coaches when they were evaluating the film.
Right. And it's really tough to be hard on a defense that did as well as Ohio State's did. So the Buckeyes win by 52-12. Let us go around the Big Ten now. Of course, 2 games canceled this week, Chip. Northwestern and Minnesota, and Maryland and Michigan. Notably, Maryland still only played 4 games, and Minnesota just 5. This was the first canceled for Northwestern and for Michigan. Penn State went and Rutgers played, and this is a game that I thought, maybe Rutgers can win this year against Penn State, but no. Penn State did what they normally do against Rutgers for the most part, 23-7. It's usually a little more lopsided than that, but the Nittany Lions had no trouble with the Scarlet Knights on this particular day. So, that's tough. But again, just the fact that they kept the score respectable is a step in the right direction for Rutgers. Greg Schiano's team continues to play hard. Nebraska went to Purdue and beat the Boilermakers 37-27. They kind of ran them out of the building in the first half. They led 27-13 at halftime, 17-3 at the end of the first quarter. And so a good day for Scott Frost as his team wins its second game of the year. Iowa went to Illinois. They got to play in the wind tunnel, even though Ohio State didn't. And the Hawkeyes take that one 35-21. No real surprise there. And Indiana-Wisconsin was probably the marquee game of the day in the Big Ten. And, Shep, I got to tell you, I don't know what's going on with Wisconsin, but they cannot score points right now. Graham Mertz doesn't seem to be the savior that everybody expected after Game 1. And the Hoosiers with Tuttle at quarterback in place of the injured Michael Penix. In fact, I think Tuttle even left this game for a few plays with an injury himself. But the Hoosiers handled the Badgers in an ugly kind of what you would expect in the Big Ten in December, 14-6.
Yeah, speaking of Indiana, I think the strength of that team is their defense. Now, granted, I mean, they lost to Ohio State, but I mean, and I think you're right. Wisconsin certainly is having their challenges offensively, and Graham Mertz has regressed considerably from the season opener when he looked like the second coming. I'm not sure how much of that is a credit to Indiana's defense or, just kind of, if he's kind of hitting the wall metaphorically, so to speak, in terms of his overall play. But yeah, that Indiana-Wisconsin game, I think if anything, as you said, that was kind of the marquee game for the Big Ten. If anything, I think it generated a lot of respect for the job that Tom Allen has done, he and his coaching staff and the players, because I think people look at the scoreboard and saw that they lost to Ohio State, and I think were kind of quick to credit Ohio State with, they probably, like they took their foot off the gas. But the reality is Indiana is a really good team, and I said it before, and I've seen on social media some other commentary that it seems more and more likely that Indiana is going to be playing in a prestigious New Year's Day bowl because of the season that they've had.
Yeah, it was a nice game. You talked about Mertz, you talked about the Wisconsin offense. They go out on opening day and they win 45-7. I think Mertz threw maybe one incomplete pass that first day, if I recall correctly. Then they had a couple games canceled because of COVID-19 issues in the Badger program. And so they missed the trip to Nebraska, the home game against Purdue. They go to Michigan, and again, they light it up, 49-11 over Michigan. And again, Mertz looks pretty good. The running game's good. Everything looks good. And then they go to Northwestern, and they can only muster 7 points, lose 17-7. They get a game canceled against Minnesota, and then they come back and play Indiana at home and can only put 6 points on the board. So really some struggles going on with the Badgers right now, and I'm not sure that it's fixable this year because they've got a trip to Iowa left on the schedule.
And Iowa is starting to play with more and more confidence. I know that the game against Illinois was closer than I think most people anticipated, but at the end, Iowa was able to pretty much dictate the outcome of that one. So I think it's going to be another difficult game for Wisconsin. Like you said, they have to go on the road to an Iowa team that is certainly playing with a lot of confidence right now.
Yeah, the Illini actually led that game at the half 14-13, but then Iowa went on to score 22 in the second half and only gave up 7. So, yeah, it's not looking great for Wisconsin this year, but they're a top 25 team, and Indiana is going to or did get a boost. I think they're back in the top 10 now after that win. I think they're back to 9th in the poll. So not too bad. That's where they were when Ohio State beat them, and then didn't get much credit for it. While other teams can beat teams with 3 or 4 losses, and because those teams just happen to be in the SEC, it's deemed an impressive win.
Yeah, the complete hypocrisy of how beating Auburn or beating any of these SEC teams when the reality is the SEC is down. I mean, anyone who watched even a few minutes of the Alabama LSU game on Saturday night, for example, could see. I mean, Alabama pretty much they could have just done whatever they wanted. LSU is a bad team this year. I don't care that they won the national championship last year. They are a bad team. So to kind of to try to apply the quote unquote style points quotient to the SEC is just foolish.
Yeah, LSU's bad. Auburn has not been good. Auburn's 5-4, but I think they won 2 games on just really extremely questionable calls this season. So, A&M beats them by 11. One of their touchdowns went right through a defensive player's hands and was caught and ran into the end zone for a touchdown. So, I don't think beating Auburn is necessarily all that impressive this year. Certainly LSU, as you mentioned, they're not very good. And Tennessee, as good as Florida's been this year, Tennessee shouldn't be playing that team within 12 points.
No, Tennessee's another team that we joke about it, but it's true, is that, you kind of wonder how good would Tennessee be if they had stuck to their original desire to hire Greg Schiano instead of allowing the mob, so to speak, to kind of completely change their idea of what they wanted to do with their football program. So Tennessee is another example of an overrated SEC team.
I agree. All right, Chip, let us move on from these proceedings. The game is scheduled for Saturday, And now there's been some discussion that if Michigan can't play, and Michigan does have some issues even without COVID, with injuries at the quarterback position and some key players out on defense, it remains to be seen, what is going to, what their lineup is even going to be on Saturday if they can play, and if they can't play, is there a chance? What do you think of the opportunity for Ohio State to maybe play against another team that can't, that has a game canceled through no fault of their own on Saturday? Like, for example, maybe the Maryland game getting made up or something like that happening.
I'd be in favor of it, but the reality is, as when I look at the schedule, and I know that a lot of people were talking about, all right, well, this coming weekend, the possibility of a rematch, for example, with Nebraska, because Nebraska, they're supposed to be, playing at, Minnesota's supposed to be playing at Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the supposition was, all right, well, if Minnesota has to cancel again, just have Ohio State play Nebraska again. And I would certainly prefer to have a game against Maryland, considering Ohio State's already played and beaten Nebraska. I'm just not sure. Everything that I've read online, maybe you've read something different, maybe our listeners have seen something different, that all the other games seem to be proceeding as scheduled. So the one that we're kind of all collectively holding our breath for is the game. And as you said, I think the mere fact that the Wolverines, I want to say that the COVID issue was not nearly as severe for them as it was for Ohio State, and the fact that Ohio State had 23 players that they missed. I think the Wolverines had maybe like 17 or something like that would be impacted. So let's hope, keep your fingers and toes crossed that the game goes on as scheduled.
That's scheduled for noon. Yeah, Minnesota looks like they're back on track for playing this week, so that would definitely throw a wrench in, because the thought was if Minnesota can't go, then Ohio State could play Nebraska, or the Big Ten could tell Rutgers to go to Nebraska and have Ohio State go to Maryland, and then they would make up that missed game from earlier in the year. And any of that is good. Anything that gets Ohio State to enough games to qualify for the Big Ten title game is good, because Ohio State, by virtue of the head-to-head win over Indiana, has already clinched the Big Ten East if they get enough games to actually win the Big Ten East.
Yeah, I think what was positive right before we started recording is I saw something on social media about Jim Harbaugh is going to actually speak to the media tomorrow at the same time, ironically, as when Coach Day is scheduled to have his press conference. So I'm sure that social media will be blowing up with any kind of dramatic news that might be forthcoming. So all signs right now are early, but they are trending in the positive direction that the game is going to be played as scheduled.
Yeah, and it seems like they are about to, get back to practicing and do all that. When this thing drops, this thing being this podcast, on Wednesday on Buckeye Scoop, we'll already probably know the answer to whether there's going to be a game or not. But you and I are recording this on Monday night, and our subscribers will get this in their podcast catchers on Monday evening, after midnight. And so, at that point, we're still kind of a little bit up in the air, but things do tend to be trending in the correct direction. I saw that Kyle Rowland talked about it being ironic that Jim Harbaugh was talking at the same time as Ryan Day, and I don't know if that's irony or coincidence. I think I'll leave that up to Alanis Morissette, maybe.
Yeah, there you go.
So yeah, it's you certainly hope that this is the game you, as any Ohio State fan, or really a lot of fans across the country, this is one of the big games of the year that you are ready for every year. Even if Ohio State's having a down year or Michigan's having a down year, every year this is one of the classic games, and you'd hate for this one to get canceled, because I mean, especially this year when there's so few games in the Big Ten as it is. But I mean, that's just when you talk about the big classic rivalries. That's just a piece of normalcy, something we've had just too little of in 2020.
I think you hit it right on the head. We've had too little of normalcy, and we're desperate for any sign or shred of it. So I'm certainly hoping that the game will kick off at noon on Fox, as we're all hoping.
Chip, the Buckeyes and the Wolverines. This has not been a good year for Michigan. The Wolverines are 2-4, and they've had quarterback issues. They've had issues on defense. As other people have mentioned, including Tom and Tony on Buckeye Weekly, even their vaunted run defense hasn't been as good in recent weeks, especially against Wisconsin. What are the chances this year of there being an upset in the game?
I think very, very slim. And slim is I'm trying to be as generous as possible. I will say, and I know that you can relate to this, I'm speculating that a lot of our listeners can relate to this, is that being somebody who experienced the 90s, I've kind of come to look at the game always with a lot of nervousness and anxiety, because there were so many years where Ohio State was the more talented team. I will say this is probably the most confident I have been about going into a game against the Wolverines since the Rich Rodriguez era. And that, you're talking in 2008, 2010, both of those were just significant beatdowns by Ohio State in Ohio Stadium. And that's kind of what I'm anticipating this coming Saturday.
So the tickle bear rides again kind of thing you're talking about here?
I think they might relish getting the tickle bear out if the tickle bear has any eligibility, because this is a severely depleted team. I mean, when you talk about you mentioned the quarterback issues, the Wolverines may be playing a true freshman quarterback by the name of Dan Villari, who was a late addition to their recruiting class. And no disrespect to Dan Villari, but the mere fact that, Cade McNamara, Joe Milton, neither of them had truly distinguished themselves, consistently throughout the like you said, throughout the season. So it might be a really rough go for the Wolverines against Ohio State if it comes to pass.
Why not play freshman Peyton Smith? I mean, Peyton Ramsey and Peyton Thorne have given the Buckeyes problems, and certainly backup quarterbacks have given problems to Ohio State. Why not go with Peyton Smith?
Well, who's to say? I mean, all I know is, from what I understand, that the rumor has it that Hassan Haskins has been getting some snaps at quarterback. Considering he like that might lend itself to like more of a like a wildcat type formation. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. Michael Barrett, from what I understand, was a high school quarterback. He's a linebacker for the Wolverines, that supposedly he's getting snaps. As I just mentioned, Dan Villari is a true freshman that, because of Cade McNamara and Joe Milton, they might be unavailable due to injury. They might be, in terms of the players that line up, you might be looking at a lot of true freshmen, a lot of walk-on players suiting up for the Wolverines in this one.
Well, why not for Michigan? Some weirdness might end up being the difference in this game. If they don't go with Dan Villari, and my parents had a Plymouth Villari when I was a kid, and it's not spelled the same, but the Villari was dependable, so maybe Dan Villari is dependable. But, something weird like Hassan Haskins running a Lynn Bowden type offense, especially when you're talking about against a team that may again be without Tuff Borland and again may be playing 3 new offensive linemen and possibly even 4 with Wyatt Davis maybe not being able to play. I think we can't rule anything out in the game, even this year. That's kind of the way I'm approaching this. And with all of the strangeness of 2020, how on brand it would be for this to be a slip up by Ohio State. I don't expect it, but I mean, that's what makes it so 2020.
Very good point. I just think from what we have seen of the Wolverines this year, when they were at quote unquote full strength, did not really inspire a lot of confidence. And if the online rumors are true that they are truly shorthanded, and we saw Ohio State even shorthanded against Michigan State on the road, how they responded. I'm just kind of lacking confidence in Jim Harbaugh being able to all of a sudden be wildly innovative and productive when he hasn't been so far this season.
Maybe that's the genius of this entire season, since it's a write-off 2020 season. Maybe the whole idea is lull Ohio State to this false sense of security by looking inept all year and then fully weaponizing the Wolverines in the game.
It's bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see how it plays out.
Indeed, Chip, indeed. All right. We've come to the prognostication segment of our show, Chip, where we have to give our score predictions and our picks to click. I am going to go first on the defensive side of the ball this week, and I am going to say that my pick to click this week against Michigan, it may not result in a ton of stats, but I think once again we're going to see a big game from one Haskell Garrett.
I like it. Really good.
What do you got on the defensive side of the ball for me?
Okay. I'm going to go with a guy who I think is been solid all year. And, on that Ohio State defensive line, Tommy Togiai. I think he's just going to show up and be disruptive all game long and do a lot of the little things that truly impact the effectiveness of the Wolverines offense.
All right, well, I'm going to go. It's kind of weird because we always end up seeming to go both linebacker or both defensive end or both defensive back, and here we are both doing defensive line this time out. I'm going to do this snake style, and you get to pick first on the offensive side of the ball. Pick to click on offense, Chip.
All right. I know he did not really have a banner game last week against the Spartans. I'm going to still go with Master Teague. I really think that this is the kind of game where he's going to get an opportunity to just kind of, pound the Wolverines because, as I said earlier, I think they're shorthanded, and I think this is going to showcase Master Teague's power throughout the game.
All right. I am going to stick with the Garretts and go with Garrett Wilson bouncing back from a quieter game for him this past week. I know he could have had a long touchdown. He had it called back on a hold from your new pick to click, Master Teague. That really wasn't even necessary. Teague had the block and he just grabbed this guy for like a split second. It was kind of a ticky-tack hold. I see why they called it, but at the same time, that guy was not going to stop Garrett Wilson, who was about 2 or 3 yards outside of him and already passing him. And if you're even with Garrett Wilson, you're really behind Garrett Wilson. So he wasn't going to make that play. It's unfortunate Garrett Wilson, had he made that play, they might have looked to get him the ball a couple more times in the second half to let him to get that 100-yard game record and keep that streak going. So I think he gets back on it this week. And I'm going to have Haskell Garrett and Garrett Wilson. So the Garretts are my picks to click.
Like it.
All right, Chip, that just leaves the score prediction, man. How do you see the game happening? There's a lot of unknowns. We don't know who's playing for Michigan. We don't know who's playing for Ohio State. We don't know if some of those guys who missed the Michigan State game were because of positive COVID tests or if they were because of tracing. And if they were tracing, they'll be eligible to come back. I think Ryan Day made some mention that the Buckeyes were going to get some guys back this week. because of that, because some of those guys were tracing and not actual COVID positive tests. And also because of these new CDC rules, there could even be a shortening of that window because of the new CDC rules that might be revisited this week by the Big Ten and their medical personnel, and that could even be shortened from the current 14 days no activity plus 7 days to get back into it. That could be shortened to 10 days. So you don't know who's going to be available, I guess, is my the long-winded point I'm making. So it kind of makes predicting the score tough, but we have to do it because that's part of the show. So what do you got?
Well, I think points are going to be really tough to come by for the Wolverines. I think they did not inspire me when they had a roster that was supposedly at full strength. The fact that they are rumored to be at considerably less than that. What I saw Ohio State do on the road at Michigan State with a depleted roster. I think you raised really good points a moment ago about, some of these players might be coming back. It's senior day. I'm happy to see that the players' families are going to be allowed in the stands, for the seniors to see those players go out. Granted, not in front of a packed house, but at least in front of their loved ones. I just think Ohio State has way too much. And the mere fact that Las Vegas has set the line at last glance, I think as a 30-point favorite. I'm going to go Ohio State 56, Michigan 7.
Wow. Man, that's 100 years of tradition, and you're saying this is going to be a cakewalk. This is definitely not your John Cooper era Buckeyes.
No, like I said earlier, I think this is probably the only time the only two times I ever felt truly confident that Ohio State was going to not only win but win handily were in 2008 and in 2010. And I will merely say that that this team that is coming down from Ann Arbor, I think they're going to do everything they can to put on a brave face, but they just really don't have the talent and the depth to keep pace with Ohio State.
Okay. So you are on record. 56-7 is what you are saying, an OSU victory. And I am going to also predict an OSU victory. I'm going to go a little bit less than what you've got in terms of spread and scoring for Ohio State, and a little more for scoring for Michigan, because it's the game, Chip, and we've seen players elevate themselves in the game. I don't think Michigan can hang with Ohio State for 4 quarters. I think they can hang around for a little while. And of course, there's all kinds of weird factors in terms of who's going to play, what's the weather going to be like, who's going to turn the ball over, that kind of thing. And just in this game, toughness means a lot as well. I don't know how tough Michigan is, but I guess we're going to find out. I'm going to say 42-20 Ohio State.
Okay.
And that's probably the biggest spread prediction I've made in the game in a long time. Maybe ever, actually. So, it sounds like, that's not that confident, 42-20, but it's for me, that's a lot. I mean, I think last year or the year before, I think I predicted Michigan would win the game.
No, most of the time I'm usually on that, okay, this is going to be closer than people anticipated. It's just, like I said, everything I've seen this season from the Wolverines and everything that I'm reading now that they're depleted just lends me to think that this is going to be the kind of game that Ohio State can pretty much do whatever they want.
I'm telling you, they're lulling the Buckeyes into false sense of security with all this misinformation. It's the rope-a-dope. I'm not buying it. We'll see what happens on Saturday. We'll see who comes out. We really don't even know who's going to be coaching for Ohio State. We know it's not going to be Ryan Day. He's going to have to spend another game away from the team, as far as I know. And We don't know about the other coaches though, because some of those guys could have been again contact tracing. So those other coaches could be back. Some of them or all of them could be back. We don't really know. I guess we're going to have to wait to see what Ryan Day says in his update to see if he gives us any clues as to what we can expect in terms of personnel on and off the field being available for Saturday. Now, if this thing takes place, I mean, this thing has it really could get ugly, and it really could not get ugly, and it's. I mean, that's just the nature of the game. Is that there have been years when Ohio State's been pretty mediocre and has been able to pull off an upset in this series, and so I'm not saying that the upset will happen here, but a 30-point spread is really hard for me to bite on, even when everything looks the way it looks this year, Chip.
I understand.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we'll come back next week and we'll talk about it. We'll see what happened, and we'll see who was closer on their prediction, to see whose picks to click actually clicked, and we'll be able to run down through our preseason picks and find out how terribly we did in guessing the finishing order in both the East and West divisions of the Big Ten. That's not going to be a pretty show, Chip. I mean, we both had Minnesota, Wisconsin in the West, with Northwestern low, very low. We both had Penn State high in the East. It's not going to look pretty for us. It's going to be, at least it'll be consistent. We'll both look bad.
Precisely. And I will take solace in the fact that we are not the only ones who thought that Penn State was going to be better. And I think, a lot of people anticipated, maybe not for Wisconsin, to possibly, if not win, but to be, far more competitive than they've been. So, yeah, I mean, I think it just kind of you never know. I mean, and if anything, like 2020 has shown us that it certainly has been, the only thing predictable about 2020 is its unpredictability.
Indeed, and that's what makes me nervous going into Saturday. But we'll see how it goes. If Ohio State does what it usually does, then even in this uncertain time, it should be okay. The Buckeyes should be all right, and if not, then it will be interesting. But at least Ohio State will have played enough games to get in the Big Ten championship game and play Northwestern, it appears, and then we'll see from there, because Northwestern again is going to be a pretty highly ranked team, and there really hasn't been too much impressive outside the SEC other than Clemson this year. I mean, I know a lot of people are sold on Notre Dame, but I mean, the ACC is just such garbage, Chip. I'm just not sold. I'm not convinced. I mean, Notre Dame beat a battered Clemson team, not full strength Clemson team at their place, where Notre Dame is one. They're on like their longest win streak at home since like the 40s, I believe.
Wow, I wasn't aware of that. I know the ACC is doing everything they can to ensure that one of their teams gets in the college football playoff. I know that. I mean, like, they're kind of looking at the circumstances around the country with COVID outbreaks. Mm-hmm. So that's why, in a way, let's hope that – I certainly hope that the game gets played. I would want that regardless of what Ohio State's record would be. But that being said, I think, it was very reassuring to me that Barry Alvarez of Wisconsin is publicly saying, we need to revise the rule, recognizing that Ohio State, their performance, allowing them an opportunity to possibly compete in the college football playoff, is in the best interest collectively of the Big Ten.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see if this would actually get revisited, because the Big Ten is very they like to stick to their guns. We saw it in the preseason when they canceled the season and just assumed everybody would sit back and tell them how great they were and how smart they were, and everybody's following suit. and sometimes they can be stuck in their ways and stick to their guns, and then they weren't gonna revisit. It's all we heard. Or they're not going to revisit this situation. They're not going to be a revote. And here we are playing a season, so obviously that didn't last. But they dragged their feet so long on that now we're in the situation we're in. And that's what concerns me about the conference. Plus, you're going to have a groundswell of support from the programs that aren't as high profile as Ohio State, saying, you can't change the rules just for Ohio State, because if it was us, you wouldn't do it. And and maybe they're correct in that. Maybe they're correct that you wouldn't do it for necessarily an Illinois or a Purdue or a Maryland. But at the same time, it's your conference. You can't cut off your nose to spite your face. You have to, other conferences do what they can to get their slice of the pie. And in the Big Ten in the past, I think they've been their own worst enemy in that. Like, we've had Jim Delaney in the past who openly wouldn't talk about whether his teams deserved to be in the college football playoff. And lo and behold, they get left out. Like, no lobbying whatsoever, and they get left out. And, you have other commissioners who have lobbied very, very hard for their teams, and they've got them in. So I think this has been a problem with the Big Ten for years, and I just hope it doesn't come back to bite Ohio State in 2020.
Like I said, I'm encouraged by Barry Alvarez wanting to bang the table for Ohio State's inclusion in the college football playoff, and maybe he will get people to see that it's not the fact that it's Ohio State. It's the fact that it's a team that is highly ranked within the college football playoff system currently. As you said a moment ago, this is in the best interest of the Big Ten. I would be all in favor of this. You mentioned, Illinois or Maryland or any of the other teams that if any of these other teams were ranked number 3 or 4, I certainly would not have a problem whatsoever. But again, you and I are not athletic directors, so we don't have any say at all.
And I think that's really the problem, Chip, is that I should have more say.
I think so.
I mean, I don't know what we can do about that, but it's not going to get fixed on this show. So I think that's about it for the cast this week. Good job, Chip. You did a wonderful job as always. Where can the folks find you on the internet?
I can be found on Twitter at Chip Minnich. My last name is spelled Minnich. And besides contributing to this podcast, I'm also a contributor to Athlon Sports. So look for an article predicting the game to be dropped by Athlon Sports later this week. I also will be writing an article previewing the Michigan State-Penn State game, which is also scheduled for Saturday afternoon. So I know I gave you the score prediction, but look for those articles on athlonsports.com later this week.
Very good. You can find me on Twitter at Mike36Fan. And you can hit either one of Chip or myself up on Twitter if you have a question that you want answered on the air. So if you missed those Twitter, handles, just hit that back 30 seconds button on your podcast device there and write them down. And then you can send us questions, and we will answer them on the air in our next show. You can catch me on Buckeye Scoop. I am the grumpy old Buckeye. Every Sunday my column runs after a game on Saturday, and you can find out what really grinds my gears about every game. If you haven't read this week's, go check out what bothered me about the Ohio State Michigan State game. What were the things that annoyed me and made me squeeze that remote a little too hard? And I'm not saying I cracked it. I might have, but I probably didn't. You'll never know unless you come over. If you do, bring beer. That's all I ask.
Small price to pay.
All right, Chip, that'll do it for this edition of the Silver Bullets podcast. We want to remind our listeners to check out all the other shows on the Buckeye Scoop Radio Network. Buckeye Weekly with Tom Orr and Tony Gerdeman. That's gonna grind Tony's gears that I said Tom's name first, I think. You can catch the the Morning Scoop with Tom Orr. He has different guests most days. Sometimes he'll have the same guest on every once in a while, but he always gets good guests. Of course, Scoop World Order and the Buckeye Sloopcast, Banks and to Give, Sheesh, just so many to choose from. And if you're not an insider, it's not that expensive. And man, Nevada Buck's been killing it with the insider nuggets, stuff that doesn't get published on our front page. But nevertheless, our insiders are in the know about stuff, including stuff like the fact that Ohio State had some good test results early in the week, and we kind of knew that the Michigan State game was going to happen. We didn't put that out there, not right away, but we knew it because we're insiders, Chip.
Yeah, and I'll say this much: not only like Nevada giving all of just truly valuable information. You can also come for Kirk Barton's soul stomping of the Texas Longhorns, as it related to the Urban Meyer rumors. That's if anyone who's a subscriber to the Buckeye Scoop knew way before Urban Meyer turned down Texas that was going to come to pass because Kirk said so on Buckeye Scoop.
Yep, the Ask the Insiders board is worth every penny, and we would encourage you to give up the price of a cheese pizza from Papa John's every month to get the good stuff, to get the really good stuff. And it's funny kind of reading through some of these threads and seeing how many people are this is worth, this thread alone is worth the subscription price. It's pretty great.
I completely agree.
All right, Chip, anything to add before we get out of here?
No, just everyone stay safe. No matter what your plans are for how you plan to watch the game, just be safe, be smart. You want to make sure that you're able to enjoy the holiday season, which is rapidly approaching. So if you're going to be getting together, with other people, make sure you properly social distance.
All right, that'll do it. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll be back next week. We'll break down the Ohio State-Michigan game if it takes place, and we're expecting at this point that it will. And we will be getting ready for the Big Ten championship game, Chip. We blinked again and the season ended.
This one especially.
Yeah, exactly. All right, nothing left to do for us, Chip, but say the thing we always say at the end. Go Bucks!
Go Bucks!